administration building. And what I'd like to do before we start this item is I just want to go ahead and swear everybody in, just to make sure that we've got an accurate record going in. I think there's going to be some people that come back and look at our minutes associated with this. I just want to make sure that everybody is, on the record and we're totally accurate. So if you could.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, everybody who, is intending to speak, that's not normally a member of the committee or council, if you please just raise your right hand. Okay, so I just, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman, you ready?
Yes, go ahead. Mike McShay with CBRE, if you want to take it away.
Okay, thank you. So, good morning, everybody. As Chairman has mentioned, my name is Mike McShay. I'm with CBRE. And I'm going to lead you through the MRC transaction today and answer any questions that you all may have. And in doing so, I'm going to start by giving a brief presentation of exactly where we've been, how we got here today, and some of the highlights or high points of all of the work that's been done today. So how many are familiar with CBRE on the commission? Most of you? Any of you? Okay. Just for the record, CBRE is the largest commercial real estate company in the world. And you can see our statistics over here on the left. I happen to run the state and local practice nationally. So city, county, and state government is in my purview. And we probably have, as you can see from this map on the right, 75, 80 cities that we are currently providing similar services to. And we have at any given point in time 5 to 10 transactions similar to what you all are considering before us at any given point in time all across the country. So I'd like to think that one of the things that we do is bring best practices from around the country to this transaction. Next slide, please. Okay, so the city, why did you even think about doing this transaction? Well, for a couple of reasons. First was the building is aging, it's deteriorating, and there's a significant amount of deferred maintenance that is spent by Mr. Rodenberg and the Dream Team every year on just maintaining the building and keeping it up to par and operating appropriately. Inadequate parking. If any of you have parked over an MRC from time to time, you're parking under the underpass. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a very difficult in and out situation for people that are coming to visit the city, and I think also for employees. One of the things that we needed to do early on was to figure out what was going to be the projection for city growth over the coming years. It wasn't enough just to replace what you really had. So we went through an exhaustive study with the Gensler Group. Gensler's an architectural firm, one of the largest in the world, and they did a full-on space planning, programming study early into the process, so we knew exactly what we would be trying to accommodate going forward. One of the things that Mr. Rodenberg wanted us to do is he wanted us to figure out how do we really optimize these very valuable city assets? How can we capture some of the tax revenue, those things? And so that was one of the goals of our assignment. Also to develop the existing riverfront site. If you've been there, you know that it's really closed off from the community. There's really not an easy way to access the riverfront. So one of the things that we've done has probably been, Jackie, a year and a half ago, we went to the Riverfront Commission and the Waterfront, I'm going to say it incorrectly, Development Advisory Board, and presented the concepts to those two committees and that board to make sure that they approved what we were considering for the site. Hey there, come on in. Can you go back, please? Sorry. And then maybe the most important thing is to improve access for citizen services. If you go to, say, for example, to MRC today, and you need to get approvals from planning or zoning or anything to do with your drawings that you might be building in the city, you have to go up to the third floor. And I can tell you from a practicality point of view, that puts an enormous burden on the building systems, the elevators, all of that, because people are going up and down. It's a security issue, it's a operations issue, and so one of the things that we wanted to make sure is any new building that would be accommodated in a better way going forward. Next slide, please. So, what have we done to date, and what approvals have already been received? Well, back in 2016, February of 2016, Mr. Rodenberg hired CBRE to help represent the city and to put this transaction in place, or consider this transaction. So we issued a competitive solicitation back in February of 2016. In December of 2016, we made the award to the Adler Group. And in the intervening period of time, a lot of things were done in terms of ballot language, getting approval from the various departments and folks in the city. But that culminated in going to the voters back last fall in November of 2016, and a referendum was put on the ballot. And I'm pleased to say that the voters approved that ballot, and they approved this transaction and the ideas behind it by 64%. So a very positive outpouring from both the community and the residents in Miami. Eventually, okay, in January of this year, we considered other sites. Not only did they approve the transaction, but we really hadn't focused completely and entirely on the Adler site. We had others that we had considered. So in January of this year, the City Commission actually approved the site of the MRC transaction to be constructed at the Adler, by Adler at the city's own property. The economics that we are in the process of finalizing documents with the Adler Group today follow both the term sheet and the ballot language as written. And our final step in this approval process will be to take it to commission in the next few weeks and ask them to vote on it and hopefully pass it in favor. Next slide, please. So what is the city getting? And I'll get into the finances in just a little bit, but they're getting rent, land rent under a long-term ground lease or sale income, and actually in the opportunity where the Adlers may exercise their option to purchase, there will be some short-term rental revenue as well. The city's going to get brand new tax revenues. So you all will remember that this is tax-exempt property for the purposes of generating capital for the city. But under this new scenario, with the development that the Adlers would build, the city will get a significant amount of tax revenues going forward. At the end of this transaction, the way that this is constructed, the city will own this brand new office building. They'll get more space, increased parking, and citizen access to the waterfront, as I mentioned earlier. So what are the terms? Okay, well, a couple of things. First is it's a ground lease for 99 years. The Adlers do have an option to purchase that property from the city for $69.4 million. Was the result of not one, but two appraisals that were done on behalf or for the city. The city will receive annual base rent of $3.6 million per year and 1.5% escalations every year thereafter on the land rent situation or scenario. The new taxes to be generated from this site we've estimated at $5.3 million a year, and if you combine both the lease revenue and the taxes, it's about $9.4 million per year of new revenue. The total income over the life of the land lease is $1.4 billion or $233 million in present value. So it's a substantial amount of money over the ground lease term. Next slide, please. So how do you? Oh, I'm sorry.
What's your discount rate on the? Is that a 4% discount rate on that calculation you just stipulated?
It is. Yes, sir. So the office building acquisition, the way that it is currently constructed, we had originally talked about doing a transaction structure called a credit tenant lease. It's moving slightly away from that to a similar transaction, but a special obligation bond is what is currently being considered. But under either scenario, what you will have is a 30-year obligation. At the end of that obligation, the building will belong free and clear to the city. There's a $140 million construction budget today. The starting rent and obligation, or the starting debt service, I should say, the way it is constructed today, under a special obligation bond, would be $5.7 million, escalating potentially to $7.8 million. And the reason I say that is we've reviewed this transaction with, I'm just going to say his name and his last name wrong, Sergio. And Sergio has actually helped us to engineer what the debt service will be to match up with the income stream for the city, so that the city will, under this transaction structure, will never be out of pocket, and it will be a net zero direction, or net zero calculation for the city, similar to what Mr. Rodenberg gave us early on in terms of direction. This had to be a net zero cost to the city. And then one of the things that we want to make sure of is that what we typically see in city government around the country is that they buy these buildings or they create these buildings, they run them into the ground, and then at the end of 20 or 30 years, whatever the obligation is, they don't have a building or an asset that's really worth anything. You know, what we've done is change that, and we've actually, the inside of the Adler's obligations to us is for them to maintain the building with a capital expense reserve that is being put into place. When I see some questions over there, they're not going to be maintaining the building, but part of what we'd originally talked about is having a capital reserve that the city would be able to maintain the building and systems going forward on an annual basis. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what is the benefit to the city? Here on the left is the nominal value. This is the $1.4 billion versus the expense going forward, which is about $1 billion. So there's a $400 million benefit to the city. And then what I wanted to show here is that under virtually any circumstances that we've looked at, this ends up being a net zero transaction cost to the city. What really happens is this graph here to the right is when you back off the expenses that the city would have to pay for deferred maintenance, for lease space that they would have outside of this building and everything else. When you back all of that off, the actual benefit to the city is $233 million versus $46 million in out expense. So it's a significant benefit to the city, and based on everything that we've looked at, we think that it's a transaction that's worthy of your consideration and should be considered for approval. Next slide, please. So one of the questions came up was about the annex. Mr. Carollo, Commissioner Carollo had asked about, can we build an annex on the site? We've studied that very significantly in terms of access, constructability, cost to construct, all of those things. And we just don't believe it works. It's not an efficient use of the space or the opportunity to generate capital for the city. So we don't think it works. But let's go on to the next slide. I won't belabor that. So, in summary, city receives $1.4 billion, expends $996, positive benefit of $400 million, and the voters approved it by 64%. So, in conclusion, we'd like your support. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding the transaction. The Adlers are here; they can help answer any questions you might have about the development itself. And then, of course, CBRE and our team has pored over the numbers for the better part of 2 years, and I think we've got it right, but we'd like to hear any or answer any questions that you might have. Mr. Chair.
Any further presentation from the city or Dream or anyone else? Okay. Any questions from the committee? Yes, sir.
Just on the mixed use, what are your thoughts, your plans, your dream for the whole complex?
Jesse, David.
So some of the reason behind the property is we own the neighboring property which controls the access, which is about an acre and a half site. That's our private property. That the city has about 3.3 acres for a combined property of about 5 acres. We've laid out different massings, and we think comfortably fitting 4 different towers on the combined site works well. So the plan is on our property. We're planning on building the city's office building, as Mike McShay pointed out. On the other balance of our property, we're doing a multifamily rental tower, and then on the city's property, we think there's room for 2 additional towers, as well as a mixed-use development with the public retail along the public Riverwalk. So it's these 2 towers. At the moment, we haven't further developed the plan in terms of whether it's multifamily rental or condo, depending on where the cycle is. The structure of the transaction is we don't take possession of the property until the city moves out, and the city's not moving out until the office building is built. So we're aiming at about 2023. But our concept is to build highest and best use and try to maximize their own value for the amount they're paying for the property, and also help the city maximize their tax revenue from the property as well.
I have a follow-up for you on that question that Eli just asked you. This is the second time I've heard somebody say this about access to the site. Why do you believe that the only access to the site is off of, is that Second Street or Third Street right there? Second Street.
Avenue and Third Street.
Yeah, it's Third Street, right?
And
So why do you believe that that property is the only access point to the site? There's a driveway
That's
on
our
Second Avenue that is city property with a city driveway.
It's our property.
It's theirs.
City has an
We have an easement.
You have a permanent easement. So we have access to the site regardless, right?
In normal conditions, yes.
What condition would we not have access under?
You do, it's just the geometry isn't gonna be it's not gonna be easy to get back to the annex building. And
But just so we're clear, we have
Yeah.
access to the site for construction or anything else that the
Yes.
city
Yes.
wanted to do, we would have full
We do.
access to the site
Yeah.
without their property.
Yes, it's just having an easement is not fee simple. I don't know what the future brings. Right now, we have continuity of service from when we were in our existing site to when we would build and move into the new site turnkey. I am uncomfortable with whatever real estate there is when there's only an easement on it and it's not fee simple. But you're right.
Could I interrupt and ask you to just turn around and look at the site map for just a second? Up here on the top left, you've got the existing garage and the existing MRC building. You have access to that site, okay? But until these buildings come down, the only way to access what could potentially be an annex right here is through this property over here to the side. This is an FDOT property right now, so we have to go to FDOT and get approval from them to be able to do that. Okay, which is gonna take some time and maybe some money.
We have already, correct?
I don't know that you do have access to that
We
site.
don't have that FDOT access at this point.
And, okay, there are two slips here, and these slips would, at least one of them would have to be filled in to get that done, and that would require Army Corps of Engineer approval, which is not going to happen easily.
So let me ask you a question. This area that's in green here, okay? That's where there's presently parking underneath the overpass, correct?
There's no parking underneath it. You're looking at it a little bit
Looking
sideways.
at the wrong side?
You're
Yeah.
upside, it's upside down.
This is where our building is
I
right
gotcha.
now.
Okay,
This
okay.
is that park area, this is the bridge, and this is the underpass underneath the bridge.
Got it. Okay, I'm looking at the building reverse.
Right.
Gotcha.
So we have to get OT access, which is not impossible, but it's gonna take time and energy and money maybe. And, you can see better the geometry out.
The real
Has
issue
there
with
been a
building-
time that we've asked DOT for like access through an easement that we haven't gotten it?
No, we can get it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, though, the real drawback from this is, are we going to be cash negative with the building over there and having to put one up, or cash positive, realizing and capitalizing on the land there? But more so, the physical structure that can go up there, you're looking about 7 or 8 floors of parking and only about 4 or 5 floors of office. The intent is to make this easier for the public to access at the same time as capitalize. And if you're going to go through 8 floors of parking to get to 3, 4, 5 stories, which would be buildings, it's going to be extremely inefficient.
I understand.
Morning, guys.
Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor joined us. Do you have anything you wanted to say on this?
No, what are we talking about? I don't know. What
The
you're
MRC.
MRC.
I just was wondering what you were doing in my conference room.
Yeah.
The MRC, I'm in favor of it. Are you kidding me? I'm in favor of it day one.
We know.
And so are the people of the city of Miami, which is the most important part.
Okay, so I think the purpose of my question was primarily access to the site, and that the city has access to the site as it is. The city has an easement. It's possible for the city to gain an easement on other locations of the site. So if the city wanted to do construction on that site, it has access to the site by itself without a deal with Lancelot or anyone else. You could.
We could, but it would, again, realize it would be difficult. We would have to leave certain areas open, but yes.
Without I understand that I will agree with you that, the
The
property
potential
lines create an awkward shaped building and things like that. I agree with you. An inefficient building to build. And not only that, a operational issue associated with running the current building while that construction would be ongoing.
And we'd be right next to a bridge, so it would be a security issue as well. But yes,
Well, we're right next to a bridge today, right?
Not like that. We would be right next to the Second Street or Second Avenue bridge over there. You literally would be within throwing distance of a building.
Look at the map in the bottom left corner, that's the one that's really telling.
This is what you're talking about, right?
Well,
That access?
I don't know about the security issue, but okay.
It's something that now under federal is something that they shy away from with setbacks. A police department or a fire department would not be able to go there. We could.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. I'm sorry, I cut you off in your questioning. You have other questions? Anyone else on the committee have additional questions?
You meant, I'm sorry, the reserves, the, Adler will be responsible for maintenance of the building throughout the lease term, when it's done?
No, the way that we had originally envisioned this, and this changed within the last week when we went to a special obligation bond, is that we were gonna do something called a credit tenant lease. And then as part of that credit tenant lease, one of the things that we wanted to make sure of is that the building would always be maintained in an appropriate way. So as part of that transaction, we had recommended, and we had started to negotiate with the Adlers, that there would be a $2.50 per square foot capital reserve set aside every year, so that as systems began to fail over time, mechanical, roof, windows, whatever, it could be replaced. That has changed a little bit in the last week as we've gone to this special obligation bond, and we would still recommend it, that you have this capital reserve as part of the transaction, and that is something we can certainly plan for and account for.
Let me just add that in all of our leases that we've been doing in the last 4.5 years, we've been adding a capital fund in them. So if the city is a tenant, or any of the city properties that we own are on land lease, we set up a fund that is capitalized so we do not become functionally obsolete. One of the issues that I did see with the leases within the city is that there was no clause within the leases to continuously put capital expenses back into a building. So we started to add that into all of our leases. So at certain points, 10, 15 years, at 20 years or 25 years, real capital is set aside to go back into the building so we don't ever become functionally obsolete in the building that we are in or that we own the land underneath.
Very important.
If I can ask a follow-up question to that, if you look at item number 5.3 in the backup, that is the justification for the ballot initiative, says MRC operating, maintenance, and capital expenditure costs. The lease back will be triple net lease. The city shall be responsible for the maintenance, repair, and operation of the MRC until the date the city vacates the MRC, including all costs, expenses necessary of any kind therewith. But I think it's silent on the rest of the transaction. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
It's inaccurate. The lease itself is what's going to carry that point going forward. So
We haven't seen it. That's why I'm just asking.
The lease terms provide for that capital fund. We can go out and we can get an outside management company to manage it, or the city can manage it itself, like we currently do to our building. But there are terms in there that require capital to be put back into that building, so we do not have happen what we've had happen to a number of our assets.
Okay, well, obviously, paying for capital expenses is a key part of maintaining a building, right? So it's obviously a critical part if the building is constructed.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, just wanted to, Mr. Feinberg asked about.
You could just give your name for the record.
Lee, of course, CBRE. Mr. Feinberg asked about the Adler's vision for the project, and I just wanted to point to this picture. These are renderings that they've had completed of what they intend to build.
Thank you.
Mr. Chief?
Yes, Chris. I'll come, Jackie, 1 second.
Sure. So Chris Rose, Office of Management and Budget, to the point of a capital fund. As budget director, I'm a bit ambivalent on the topic, meaning I would prefer annually not to have to budget that money, but I recognize long term it's the right thing to do. So we've been working together on this over the years, and it's actually been 5 years now, probably. So it is something that we've been trying to build in going forward. And what it does is it just smooths it out, as opposed to having to spend $1.4 million on elevators 1 year, both in the MRC. It just smooths that out so that we have a reserve going forward. So I hate to say it this way, but as budget director, I'd kind of rather be forced to do that. It makes it easier to do the right thing over time. So I just wanted to get that over.
I also
However
believe
we
very
do it.
strongly in preventative maintenance instead of last minute securing capital and going out to find a vendor to replace an HVAC system. Last minute can cost us. We've had an instance where it cost us $500,000. If we would have taken the time, set aside the money, and done it over a period of course of time, it would have probably cost us less instead of a last minute replacement. So we build them into all of our leases right now.
It's interesting that you say that. I worked on something with the county recently, and obviously the city manages the property different than the county manages the property. But something that's illustrative of the way government manages capital expenditures in an ongoing way is that you ask the county what the costs are to manage a building and what the long-term costs are that they really can't tell you. And one of the reasons for that is that things like HVAC, replacements, or even light bulb replacements aren't factored into their ongoing costs of what it costs to maintain the building. So it's very difficult to get a baseline cost of what it actually costs you to maintain a building over the life cycle of the building, 30 years, whatever it might be. That is a difficult thing to do, so it's obviously forward thinking to try to, budget for some rational amount of money associated with that. So you deserve credit for that. Other questions? Linda? Any questions or anything? Okay, I have a bunch of questions. Can you read for me, Robin, what the ballot language is? Specifically? What the voters voted on?
We have it too if you need it.
Yes, we have it.
I just want it to be in the record for my attorney.
This was for the approval or disapproval of the qualified electors of the city of Miami. The following ballot question, quote, shall the city enter into a 99-year lease of approximately 3.15 acres at 444 and 460 Southwest 2nd Avenue with winning bidder Lancelot Miami River LLC, providing, colon, partly funded mixed-use riverfront development, new public river walk and other public amenities, greater of $3,620,000 of annual rent, increasing 1.5% annually, comma, or 3% of gross revenues, $69,400,000 purchase option, 2% capital transaction fee, living wage and 10% workforce housing, design and development of a new administrative building, question mark, end quote.
Okay. What does design and development of a new administrative building mean? Robin?
I would defer to the Department of Real Estate and Capital Asset
No, I'm
Management.
kind of asking from a legal perspective, like how the ballot language should be interpreted. Because the voters, for the most part, only see that. Then there's a backup that goes along with it that seems to be, that talks about the amount of rent that's paid and things like that, but doesn't speak to, at least the version that I've seen that was provided in, as part of the packet for this meeting, anything related to the design and development.
Respectfully, sir, because I was not involved in the transaction until just a few weeks ago, and I was not involved in the ballot language, but I know that our Department of Real Estate and Asset Management has been very well involved in putting this together and putting together the ballot language. I would ask for them to please address your question on the record.
Okay.
I can answer your question there.
I'll get to you in a sec. 1 second. Go ahead, Trina.
I'm not sure what you're exactly asking. Which word are you looking to have defined?
Well, I think the phrase as it was presented to the voters is the key element. Design and development of a new administrative building.
Right, so they are designing and they are acting as a developer for the new building.
Okay, for a fee,
exactly that.
right?
Correct.
So,
and by the way, that was provided in the backup information in detail.
where?
Anybody?
Can you share with me where? I mean, like where that comes out? I'm just kind of confused by that because I don't see it anywhere.
So there
Right.
were, Jacqueline Lorenzo, sorry, the Department of Basics. There were 2 term sheets included with the backup for the ballot question. One of them spoke to the various terms on the ground lease for the MRC property, and one of them spoke to the new development of the new MRC building, or
Which
the
were
new
two
administrative-
separate items. Just to
Okay,
be
yeah,
clear
but
about
they're
that.
both what you sent us earlier,
Yes,
correct?
yes. They're
Show,
both
show me
included.
where in the document I missed it. The design and development section where it says the
So-
city's responsible to pay for the cost of the new building.
It's, let me tell you what page. On the PDF that I sent earlier today, if you go to page 37 or 36, that's where the term sheet begins for the site selection, design, financing, construction, and conveyance of the new building. And the way that it's written, we originally were contemplating a CTL financing structure. So the city would pay rent, which would thereby pay down the amortized amount, right? So ultimately, that was the structure. Now we're considering a special obligation bond instead, but at the end of the day, it's still the same. The city would be paying for the new building.
And the bond seems to be more beneficial to the city. CTL was still open. We're pretty much like anybody else. We're going ahead, getting a turnkey building. It's like buying a house. We're getting a house built for us, designed, developed. We move in.
Sure, I get it. Can you talk to me, Robin, about special obligation bonds and the rules for repaying those special obligation bonds? What revenues are eligible to be expended to pay down the cost of special obligation bonds?
If the city has a covenant to budget and appropriate, which is what I'm aware that I've been included in discussions about, what it means is any legally available revenues of the city. Chris?
Not to include ad valorem revenue.
Correct. Not to
So no property taxes,
No
correct?
property taxes, we would have to go to the voters, as you remember when we did on the Miami Forever bond.
Seems like a pretty big issue because the lion's share of the revenue that we're showing in the presentation are property tax revenues, no?
Well, that only came up in the last week, we were.
Just one clarification on the legal point.
Well, I'm
sorry.
just talking about what's in front of us.
Just one clarification on the legal point, and Robin can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the covenant to budget and appropriate pledge, you can't pledge property tax revenues. At the end of the day, the city could utilize whatever revenue source it wanted to make the decision.
For a special revenue bond, the city can pay for a special revenue bond without special revenues, but with property tax revenues if you fall short of the revenue.
Okay. There is no pledge, so in other words, an investor buys those bonds knowing they can't force the city to raise property taxes to pay them back.
I understand that. I understand that, but the city has an obligation to pay them back or the city defaults on those bonds.
Absolutely.
Right. So, Mr. Chair, if the city wanted to pledge directly the ad valorem taxes, the city would need to go for a referendum about the pledge of the revenue.
Which is not, forgive me, Chris Rose, office man, which is not what's being proposed here today at all.
Okay, so what is the source of revenue to pay it back if it's not ad valorem revenue?
And I will amend what Sergio said just a moment ago. So it can be a covenant to budget and appropriate, which means you're not pledging a specific revenue. Or it could be any other non-ad valorem revenue. It does not even have to be tied to the site. That's the other thing, just to note. So we could find another non-ad valorem revenue that has not been pledged to another bond and pledge it as long as that is eligible.
Because all of our non-ad valorem revenues, for the most part, come into one pot of money that are then pledged out specifically to other projects, and we covenant as a city that we will pay for the cost of those bonds as they're sold.
Yes.
Just like we've done for Miami Marine Stadium without having ever really essentially sold those bonds, right? But those have been approved.
Well, what's been approved is for us to reimburse ourselves. So what we've done is we've put in place an intent to reimburse ourselves resolution. So if we were to do the same thing for this transaction, we would put in place what's called a resolution declaring official notice of intent to reimburse from tax exempt bonds.
How come we haven't done that already for all the costs that we're incurring for anybody else?
Mr. Rose?
Can you ask the question again?
We haven't put in any protection for ourselves for our early costs prior to the time that the actual debt sale is approved. You've actually got a proposal to sell bonds sitting in front of us, and we haven't done anything to reimburse ourselves on that,
No, we have not.
on that early work. I'm asking why.
Well, we have not incurred expenses other than staff time at this point, which is already budgeted.
No expenses for CBRE to go through this, no expenses for PFM. PFM's paid, I guess, when the transaction closes.
Same thing for CBRE.
Okay.
And this was a decision that was literally evolved over the last few weeks. The CTL is still there if we want to do it.
All right, but just so that we're clear, the cost of this new building, this new office building, is roughly $139 million, and the proposed bond is for roughly $150 million, correct?
The construction and all the soft costs involved are roughly 140, give or take, and then you have finance costs that are going to be associated with the bond or with the CTL.
Right, and there's a premium, on the bond as well, which gets you to 150.
On the bond, there is. So we are being conservative. I do not think we're going to hit the 150, but need to be safe. So we brought that number up to 150.
Okay, at $150 million, how big is the building that we're building? 233,000 square feet, right?
That's net usable with the core and a loss factor in there, which is normal in every building. We've got about 273,000 square feet in a normal office building, and this is key because it's not included in the presentation. If we went out there the day this was completed and we went ahead and sold this to a private investor at a terminal cap rate of about 5%, which is kind of high for Miami CBD, the building is worth about $180 million
On completion.
upon completion. So we already have, once we start construction, we have a cushion factor somewhere in the neighborhood of about $30 million if we ever decided we needed to go ahead for some odd fiscal emergency and sell this out to a REIT or whoever we wanted to.
Okay. What's the price per square foot that we're calculating to build this new building?
The soft costs, I need it in front of me, are...
Total, all in. It's $550 a foot, roughly $560.
The actual hard costs are around $250. The soft costs and all the other related costs are about another $250. That's correct.
We also have furniture, if that can be included in our budget.
That's correct. This is a turnkey, so we have all the furniture, fixtures, and equipment going in there. All we need to do is open the door and walk in there.
What's an analysis of what it costs to build like a Class A office building downtown Miami right now?
We were just talking about that. I would say it's in the $500, $550 range as an average.
Yeah, it seems like an awful lot of money to be paying for a government building as compared to a Class A office building.
I think we're missing something here. If we were to build this building ourselves, our costs would be over $700 a foot based on the experience I've had in the last 5 years in this city. By having a private developer, we're doing market. We're not going and doing it ourselves.
We've actually analyzed the cost, Daniel, and are very comfortable that the numbers
I think
proposed are fair.
What's market is market. It may seem like an awful lot of money, but that is what it costs to do something in Miami. In New York, San Francisco, LA, it's higher than that.
Much higher.
This is what it costs to build a building here.
What are the fees associated with the work that Adler's doing associated with the project?
Their development fee is at 4%, which is at, if not a little bit below market, and that is it.
4% developer fee when they don't have to put up any of the debt or go get any of the debt. So they're just essentially serving as an owner's representative to oversee the work without having to finance the work themselves?
Theoretically, if they were doing this in the private market, their fees would be above 7%.
I disagree with that. I think you could go find somebody to serve as owner's rep for this project for a point or a point and a half, 150 basis points in the value of the project.
We are getting an owner's rep to represent the city side of things. You're talking about a developer, not an owner's rep.
I get it.
No, there's a big difference.
We're talking about overseeing a contractor.
No, you're talking about somebody taking the development risk to some extent on themselves. We can't get as a city.
Significant delivery risk.
You have
the
everything right.
The delivery risk is what? When they don't have to finance it, what is their delivery risk?
Cost of goods. They're doing a GMAX, a GMP.
Okay.
They have the risk
as we've discussed at a very high price.
You're being. That's your opinion. I've been in this business for 35 years. I have a very different opinion of what you're saying right now. This is market. If we went ahead and did this ourselves, the numbers would be vastly different, and having this at a 4% number, when there is inside of this contract the clause that if they do have to put equity up, they would be charging the city, I believe it's what, 12%?
Not to exceed.
Not to exceed 12%. In a normal course of doing business like this, if a developer is taking on a certain amount of risk, they have the ability to charge for their money. This could, if we did it ourselves, spiral to a much higher cost, or if we did not put this into the contract and we did not keep certain levels in
Could also
the
come at a
contract.
lower cost.
We have it. If the GMP comes in at less, then we have a shared cost savings plans 50-50.
No, I'm just saying if you did it yourself, it could also come at a lower cost.
No, not the city.
Well,
There hasn't been one case that I've seen so far where we have been even close to market at development. If we went out to market and we tried to do this ourselves, again, $700 a foot is probably conservative.
Hey, Daniel, can I just interrupt, Mr. Chair? We're finishing up the new courthouse facility in Austin, Texas, and the developer fee there is also 4%. So it's a municipal project, underwritten, very similar to the way that you are considering it.
it's a Hunt project.
Yes, it is.
So on that project, Hunt's financing the project, correct?
They're financing portions of it, yes, but it's being
So I thought-
underwritten with a bond.
Well, the bond isn't sold until after the project is completed, and it's sold for availability payments going forward,
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay. So they finance the entire project during the delivery phase, and they take all the delivery risk with their own money, correct?
I'd have to go back to look at it. I don't know that.
Yeah.
We could go out and still do a CTL.
I mean, I'm confused as to why you go through an entire process over the course of a year or more, and you're focused on a CTL, and then it's stated here today that you move to a bond structure with a special obligation bond, which we're essentially going to covenant to budget and appropriate property taxes from a week ago, and that's in front of us today.
That's not what happened.
Legally available revenues.
Yeah, but there's no other legally available revenues to pay for this other than property taxes. That's why we're using in the spreadsheet and the presentation, the deck that's presented to us today, the entire justification in terms of the cost is property taxes.
Mr. Rose?
So, no.
I understand why you don't want to say it on the record,
No, no,
Chris,
no,
but I mean, it's hard to avoid the fact that you look at the numbers and it's all property tax. There's no, the value of the lease payments and the sale of the property is $69 million. And we're going to go out and do a building that's $150 million, and we're trying to justify here with magic numbers how the thing matches up. It just
It's
doesn't.
not magic numbers. I promise you, Mr. Chair.
It just doesn't. It just doesn't.
Wait, let me ask you a question before we even go there. What would you see have happened?
What's that?
What would you see have happened?
Well, I think I'm not here to predict to you guys and to tell you what to do or tell you how to do your job. What I'm here to do is protect the taxpayers, and I'm here to protect the commissioner that appointed me, and I am here to evaluate and ask very difficult questions from a financing perspective and understand why the city is proposing to sell $150 million in debt for a project that I think 90% of the voters that voted for this probably thought that the design and development of a new administrative building meant the developer was going to pay for it.
So we were going to have an RFP where the developer was going to buy a piece of land for us and then go out and spend another 140, 150 on top of the value of the land to buy that land. I think that's a little bit strange, but let me ask you again, what would you, I know what you're saying about which commissioner, what would you see have happened that this city goes ahead and for an annex, instead of realizing a deal where we made net between, on a day one that we have this thing substantially up, 30, 40, 50 million dollars, and over the life of this, maybe net $200 to $400 million, we should go ahead and right away spend another 70, 80, 90 million dollars on an annex next door, not realize the property tax is next door, and let it sit dormant for the next 90 years and not receive that income going into the tax rolls. Because I'm a little confused how you're looking at this. And whether or not any of us have had the experience of doing this or not, or sitting within the city and outside the city, I'm a little confused as to how an office building that used to be a headquarters for FPL and is very inefficient today, and as the city continues to grow, and as the building doesn't have capital expenses poured into it, it's going to continue to deteriorate. What exactly we're supposed to do going forward? The voters did have the ability to take a look at everything. They did vote. Aside from the vote, right now we are getting a deal that at the end of the day, the taxpayers are really not going to be footing this bill going forward. So if you can come up with a different idea of how to do this,
I don't know how you get to that conclusion that the taxpayers aren't ultimately paying for it, because, and I recognize that on a special obligation bond, nobody wants to say on the record that you're going to use taxes to pay for it, but you've got to look at
the value.
You've got to look at the justification in the documents. I mean, look, and here's the other problem, is that we're selling a special obligation bond, and we've got to be off the property in order for the developer to demolish the current building and develop the new facilities, right? The new condos.
There's continuity of service. I'm not sure you went through the deal. The continuity of service. Wait. We stay in the building and continue to operate in the building.
Right.
And certainty and the process. The building goes up before they're able to take over our land.
Clear.
We move into a new building, and then they get possession.
Clear, which we have already paid for. We have to sell the bond in order for that building to be built, right? Then we move out of the MRC. We're not paying rent on the MRC for those 5 years, right? We have no rent that we pay for the first 5 years while the other building is being constructed, but we had to have sold the bond in order for the other building to be built.
Or you go out and get a credit facility, credit tenant.
But that's not what we're discussing. We're talking about a special obligation bond.
Okay, so if we're going to do a special obligation bond, we are doing something in a period of time when we are nailing down this construction dollars to go build.
Okay,
and
so the special obligation bond is sold. The building is constructed. We move out after it's complete, after everything is done, turnkey. We move into the new building. Everything's hunky-dory. Everybody loves their new space, right? We get the Taj Mahal of all the city halls around here, and everything's wonderful. Then we move, then that building is somehow demolished, right? And Adler Group now has an obligation to develop a new facility there, which includes 2 condo towers, a hotel tower, an office tower. When? When is their obligation? And Julie, what happens if they don't?
As soon as they can realize it.
Well, what happens if the market goes into turmoil? Like a lot of people are predicting that we might in the next 3 to 5 years. And they can't go out and get debt facilities to develop the 2 condo towers, the hotel tower, the office tower, etc. How long do they have before they have to build that? And so then what happens to the property tax stream if it takes them 12 years to develop the site, or even worse, something like Flagstone Gardens where nothing's built for 15 years? And I'm not saying that that's what they want to do. Obviously, if they're spending money on the site, they're going to want to put that money to work, and they're going to want to develop it. They're going to want to realize a profit.
You just answered your own question.
I get that. But the debt markets could prevent them from doing that. The debt markets could prevent them from making a net present value payment or a $69.4 million payment in year 6 for the property. We could be sitting there with $3 million in ground rent.
When does this happen? When in the cycle does this happen? Before or after our building is built?
Well, that's a good question.
No, I'm asking you. You can't.
I can't predict the future of the markets, but what I'm worried about is selling a bond that the city then has to service.
Right.
Okay? And we don't have the revenue streams coming in, and we've got a confluence of factors that includes a lot of other special revenue that the city would normally realize, including certain revenues that came from Flagstone and from other places that we're not going to realize, that now we have a problem.
It's a great
and so the notion that we're not going to go out and take available property taxes, which make up the balance of the primary general revenue fund, and we're not going to, there's no foreseeable situation where we would tap into those and use those to pay for this because they're legally available to the city.
You're not answering my question.
It's just a question, it's a problem.
You answer my question. When do you foresee this happening? And I'm asking a question for a reason. When do you foresee this happening? The day that our building goes up when we move in, or at some point before that?
I don't understand your question.
I'm asking, you just gave a worst case doomsday scenario when everything has to happen.
That could happen at any time.
Okay, so
the bottom could fall to the markets at any moment, as we've all seen.
So is our building finished or is it not finished? Is
Well,
it
I
before we
think
raise
that-
the financing, or is it outside after we raise the financing? Is it before ground is broken or before?
So-
Because each one of these situations that you're bringing up right now, that I don't really have an answer this. You just gave a whole scenario. At each point that something is happening, the market at some point that you just gave has to come to a dead standstill for that to happen.
That's never happened before here.
Okay.
Yeah.
But besides the fact, let's say it does. The worst case scenario does happen. There's a dead standstill. If our building is already up, we already have a realized value in that building. We've captured equity in a brand new building that is up, that the city now has on its asset books.
Right. So
As an
I
asset.
feel a lot more comfortable, even if I could get comfortable with the fact that folks like to make it sound like there was always the deal that the city was going to pay for this building, which I think anybody who followed this in the media and otherwise knows that it was presented and it was sold through the Miami Herald and other sources as the city getting a new administrative building as part of the deal. City getting a new administrative building as part of the deal.
You're saying that the perception was that the city
City wasn't going to pay for it.
We're
That's
paying
correct.
for it,
That
but
the
that it
city was paying for it by the contribution of its waterfront property.
So the developer was going to not pay us $70 million. They were in essence going to pay us 3 times that, $210 million.
I'm not speculating on what the developer was going to pay or
No, I'm
whether
trying to get
the
to what your
whether the
understanding was.
cost of the building as it's projected here is appropriate or
We
not.
made it very clear from day one this was what's called a net zero deal, that there was never going to be a period of time that the city was going to have to come out of pocket for this deal, and that is the way it was structured. It was never presented anywhere, any place, that the developer was going to go ahead and pay $210 million for a $70 million piece of land.
I don't think that anybody.
So I don't understand how it was misconstrued that way.
Well, I disagree with you, but nevertheless, even if I could get comfortable with that, okay? Even if I could get comfortable that it was construed fairly to the voters, which I don't believe that it was, even if I could get comfortable with that, I still can't get over the point that the city has to put up its risk first, its $150 million, and then the city doesn't have any protection, it seems, to get the developer to perform on its portion of this at any date certain. Okay?
Why are you saying they don't have to perform?
Well, to perform on the development of the site. If they don't develop the site, do we get the property tax windfall that you all are talking about?
You just said two separate things. They don't get the site until our building is finished.
I get it.
So
but they don't have to pay for our building.
They don't have to pay for
They're
our
not paying
building?
for our building. They're getting a developer fee of 4%, which is going to be about $5 million, which is...
So the entire time they're going to sit there and they're not going to be putting up on their site, which is on the corner. One of the reasons why the Adlers actually came into this deal is because they own the building on the corner and they're going to be building on them. So there are going to be costs going out, and they already have spent money on this. So the situation that you're painting, while it's very interesting and theoretically, I guess somewhere it could happen, it already isn't happening. So in order for them, they are going to have to realize their capital. Yes, and every developer, I don't know of any situation where a developer is going to sit and not go ahead and construct something, but I guess it is possible. But for them, they have to finish the building before they get to our building, yet they're building their own building, and some of those associated costs are going to be built into what they're going to be building on our site. So there's no way they're not going to be spending money. Once that clock starts, that developer has got to put that building up, even if they have to come out of pocket a little bit at the beginning on their site to go ahead and do it, and they have to finish our building.
What clock is that?
Their own money. They're borrowing money to go build it on their corner site.
But there's no clock. There's no reversion clause or anything like that, is there?
You're going in a completely different direction about the reversion. They, in other words, if they're going to realize their profit, which is the real estate market works.
I'm not here to worry about their profit. What I'm here to worry about is the city's
twisting
protection
what
from
I'm saying.
debt.
The protection from what?
From debt. What I'm worried about is the city taking on debt that the city will be responsible for and may not have the revenues to support.
Mr. Chair, can I interrupt? I think that in the very worst case scenario, the Adlers either have to pay $3.6 million a year and not exercise their purchase option, or pay $70 million to exercise their purchase option. So in the Armageddon scenario, your exposure could potentially be $70 million, I suppose.
Correct, which is the difference. And so my point is that the numbers are out of whack here. Okay? That we're proposing a $140 million building and we're getting 70 for the property, and they need to be about equal for us to be, in the realm of certainty where we're protected.
Once the building is up, you do have that protection. And they have to continue to build it. They can't stop midway and stop building.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter if they build it or not. You don't understand. The point I'm making is that we have to pay for it
In a
regardless.
doomsday scenario, like you're just giving, if we can't move into it, we get
I'm
to go
not,
ahead and
I'm
sell
not
it.
suggesting, Daniel, that we're ever gonna be in a situation where we're not gonna move into the building. The building's going to be completed. There's going to be a performance bond on the building. The building is going to be completed for the $150 million in debt. What I'm worried about is the rest of the
freeze
development.
on their development.
Yeah,
So the taxes.
because now we
are gonna
don't have
go
any
up.
money to pay for the debt
They're
that we
still
just issued
paying-
for the building that's already been built.
They're still paying taxes on that land. And the taxes are going to go up the second there is a recorded sale, or if not, it's still going to go up.
Well, or if they don't sell it, what if they buy it? What if they just
They're
continue to
paying
pay the lease?
They're paying a lease.
Okay. But I mean, my point to you is that that debt service is going to be well in excess of whatever they pay in the
If they
lease.
can come
The
to
debt
a
service on our
complete
150
dead
million.
stop and the market stops,
$7.5 million.
you're saying that the market comes to a complete stop and they stop all their construction on site.
Could. It could happen.
And that's
And by the way,
my
if you talk to guys in the market, and I know you do, and I know you guys do, there's a lot of guys that are putting up residential product right now that are terrified. And there's going to be a lot of distressed product on the market in the next 2 years.
And that's
And there's going to be a lot of guys who are looking, they say, okay, I've got a certain amount of equity that I was going to put in a deal to develop something on vacant land that I have, but instead of putting it at that, I'm going to be looking at distressed assets and what I can put it into because I'm
so
going to make
it's
a much
no longer
better return on
what
that
the
long
ballot
term.
says. It's now what you think the market, what's going to happen to the market.
What I'm worried about is the risk for the city. And I don't think it's wise for the city to continue on a path where we're going to have a bullish path, where we think the market's going to continue to be bullish, and that all of these things are guaranteed to continue to happen. And then we have a problem in 4 or 5 or 6 years servicing debt, and we have to make dramatic cuts to either the services that are provided from the city, whether those are parks or anything else that are built, or the city has to go out and raise property taxes in order to
You
pay
just
for
said
this
the magic
special
words I
obligation
wanted to
bond.
get out of your mouth. In 4 or 5 or 6 years, we can hit that. So there'd be no
I'm
development.
throwing that out as an example.
I know you are, and you're painting a picture that really is a very interesting picture. In 4 or 5 or 6 years, so there'd be no development until 4 or 5 or 6 years when they're already doing pre-development and they're probably going to break ground relatively quickly after this transaction happens. You're saying in 4 and 5 or 6 years, the market's going to.
What's our guarantee that they do that, Daniel?
There's no guarantee in the real estate
Okay,
world. You're
so then,
right.
so then,
So,
then here's the
our
problem.
guarantee is this. Wait, you're not letting me finish. Our guarantee is this. This building gets finished, and we now have bonds in place, and we have a building that is now worth more than it's built, than its costs.
Can I pass the gavel to you?
Yeah.
Pass the gavel. I'm going to make a motion to deny this, to not approve this item. I think there's too much unknown in it. There's too much that was not really clear to the voters in this process. The commission wants to overrule that, but I don't think as a finance committee it would be prudent for us to recommend selling debt associated with a transaction like this with all of these unknowns, with all of these factors that present too much risk to the city. Our job is to protect the city's finances, not to be bullish on the real estate market or real estate development. So that's my motion, that we deny this and not approve it as a finance committee.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
For the purpose of discussion. Any further discussion on this? Robin, were you around when the city acquired the old DuPont Plaza Hotel and office building for the city administration building?
No, sir, I wasn't.
I guess I was the only one here in this room. And, that was my last experience with the city acquiring a new property. I'm, as a member of the board, I'm ready to vote on this.
Okay, let's call the question. No, I think we've got a motion and a second here. Let's call the question.
I thought it was for discussion.
No, but the discussions of the board here, the questions are over at the time of the motion. So go ahead.
I had a question regarding the ballot itself. Make mention of the special application bond or how the project was going to be financed to the citizens? It did not mention the city finance. No.
The only thing that the ballot mentioned is this, specifically. Design and development of a new administrative building. Okay, so can you call the question?
Do I still have the gavel?
You do.
As a courtesy, I'm gonna let you ask this question.
I mean, we've been spending 3-4 years on this. We've spent, millions of dollars of our own money working in great faith with the commission, with the city administration. I appreciate and recognize a lot of the points you're making. If you'd like to have more of a dialogue on this with us, and I think we can answer some of your questions. I think this really is a great opportunity for the city of Miami. And if you'll allow me, I can explain some of the items that you brought up as questions on this issue.
Your gavel.
How long would it take you to summarize some of this?
I'll do it in a minute if that pleases the chair. So the ballot question specifically, as per City of Miami Charter, was relative to the sale and lease of waterfront land. The entire purpose of the ballot question was in order for the city to comply with that charter requirement. And if you read the ballot language, the opening paragraph specifically refers to the city's property, and it's about selling or leasing that land. And all of the terms in the ballot were related to the city doing that transaction. The political intent of the ballot language, including that last bullet point, was to make the voters aware the city wasn't just selling the building just to get money, but was selling the building or leasing the land in order to finance and have available resources to monetize the asset for a new administrative facility. There's no question that needs to go to the voters about building an office building. That's a city commission approval. So all of the focus had been on that ground lease item, which is why there may be confusion on the ballot language. We made a motion or a request not to have that last bullet point because it wasn't even necessary, but it was thrown there. They're thrown there for that intended purpose. Separately, the City of Miami Commission and the administration have full discretion of whether they want to build themselves a new office building, which has been the intent not only of this commission but of previous commissions. Was voted in favor of unanimously by the commission on multiple occasions, both this commission and the previous commissions. So I think we've been trying to work in good faith with the administration and are open to having more of a conversation about this.
Jonathan, I feel for you, man, and if you know anything about me, I'm generally pretty sensitive to real estate development deals and business interests in this community. I just feel that the deal that's in front of the city, in my position as chairman of the finance committee, is not a good deal for the city, doesn't put the city in a good position, presents a tremendous amount of risk to the city from a debt standpoint, and it's not wise and not prudent for the city to go forward on that. Now, the city commission, which you guys have intimate relationships with, has I believe they have the authority to overrule us, I'm not sure, and they may do that, but I don't think it would be wise from a standpoint of the finance committee to recommend to the city they go forward with that deal structure, considering the amount of risk that exists on it. And I really feel for you, and I don't want you to feel like you're getting the rug pulled out from underneath you, although I'm sure you do. But it is just at this point in time, the numbers don't level up. They don't equal out to make it worthwhile to the city to do it. At least in my humble opinion, and what would be prudent from a debt standpoint, considering all of the other priorities that the city has and all of the other costs that we know are coming up for the city, and coming into a year when we know the city's budget is going to struggle for a period of time. I just can't, in good conscience, recommend that the city commission go forward with it. They may have a different take, and I encourage you to talk to them about it.
Sure. One last question.
Would you be more comfortable if it was structured as a credit tenant lease, which was not an obligation bond of the city?
I'd be happy to look at any structure that's placed forward to the city for the finance committee to review. Based on what was presented and what's in front of us today, I'm not comfortable with what's out there. Okay, I can't predict whether I'd be comfortable with some other structure. I can tell you this, that if the cost that we're expending for a new building is similar to the cost of what we're selling the land for, that would make me feel a lot more comfortable from a risk perspective. But I don't believe that what's in front of us is that transaction. That's me. I can't speak for anyone else.
Mr. Rose, last comment.
Thank you. If it does become a credit tenant lease, either way, that is obligating the city forward, and we would need to request approval of the finance committee for that. And as we've run the numbers through our FA, the credit tenant lease costs the city more. So they're just two different sides of the same coin. Just want to get that on the record.
If you're in support of the chairman's motion to recommend that the commission not accept the deal, vote yes. If you have a contrary point of view, vote no, and I'm calling for a roll call.
Call the roll.
Eli Feinberg,
No.
Erica Pascal,
Abstain.
Is that, Madam Chair, is that possible?
I believe
Is she conflicted?
I believe that she has a conflict and she can abstain, and she can also, she hasn't had any discussion, you think about it, she hasn't said anything on the record, and so she would go and she would file with the city clerk a notice of abstention after the meeting, because Erica has not made any comment during the meeting. Thank you.
Eric Zajela,
Yes.
Linda Harris,
Yes.
Elsa Elias Lopez,
Yes.
Okay.
Motion carries. Got back to you.
Okay. Showing any other business, any other issues anyone wants to bring up for discussion? All right. Show this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much for your time.